There we go. I don't know what's happened to the newest release of OBS. They used to have like a pause button for pausing video, but now it's gone. I don't know what the heck they did with it. Um, all right, just before we actually get into the lesson itself, I did this last week and I kind of introduced it halfway through, but this time I think I'll introduce it at the beginning, just so we don't accidentally run out of time and we can't get there. Um, this is the GitHub that we're using for our code, and you can access this from your resources folder in Blackboard, and you'll see GitHub link for a lesson example. So if for any reason you miss class, the link there will have the current lesson. Now, for those of you that actually know a little bit about Git, if you clone this repo, you're obviously just going to get all of our lessons. If you want just a singular lesson and you want to download it, you're kind of out of luck because there's really no way to do that. You have to download the whole repository, unfortunately. Or you can right-click on individual files and download them, but that'll be tedious. So anyways, at least the code base is there. This is completed code, right? So even lesson 4 that's up here right now is completed code. So if you ever are going to miss class, that's a good place to use as a reference point. And this is my segue to our project that we're going to be working on. It's also a good code base to start for your projects, okay? So here's the project 1 that we're going to do. There's an MD file on there, which stands for Markdown. Markdown's kind of a cool, it's not like HTML. It produces HTML. Basically, it's just a very basic type of syntax that you use to be able to create nice looking README files is really its purpose. Anyways, the instructions MD file is really important. These instructions are also on Blackboard under the projects folder itself. You can access the projects folder either through Blackboard on the projects folder, or you can go to lesson 4 and there's also a link to it from there. So there's like 3 different places to go check these instructions. So project part 1, I say part 1, it's not really a part 1, it's a project 1, because project 2 will likely be fairly different. So the whole objective is to demonstrate your knowledge of CRUD. That's what we've been doing, in case that seems brand new to you. That's what we've been doing for the last week and a bit. This week we'll be continuing with that. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. It's basically the strategy of working with your database, right? And working with data. So this is just basically to demonstrate that you understand those concepts. Yeah. So you can work in groups of up to 3 people, no more than 3 people. That is non-negotiable. Stressing that, because I always wind up with like 6 students asking me to put them in other groups with 4 other people and stuff like that. No, it's 3 people. If you have 4 people that want to work in a group, create 2 groups. That's simple as that. So you must use the files provided. You can add more if needed, but you have to use the starting base files. Have to. There's metadata in those files too, so I'll know if you haven't. You must implement each file's requirements. They'll be in the specific files, so make sure you check them all. So there's steps inside the files, just like we did with the labs. Same kind of concept. Make sure you do the minimum requirements of each file, okay? Your application must exist on GitHub. So next week we have a full 3-hour dedicated class to GitHub and Heroku, which means we will be learning to push our code to GitHub, and then we'll be learning a deployment strategy. So up to this point, you guys have used FTP. The real world doesn't use FTP. The real world uses GitHub and then does deployment solutions. And deployment solutions are usually done by having listeners built into an application that hear your changes in Git and automatically pull, or you can use something like Capistrano to push. We're going to do a very simple process, which is Heroku, and Heroku will actually listen for changes on its own. It's not hard to set up, takes a few seconds, and then Heroku will pull your changes and rebuild your application every time you do a new push to Git. So we're going to learn that because that's more industry standard. It's definitely more beneficial to you if you understand that concept, okay? Not that FTP is completely non-existent. Understanding how to FTP is also definitely worth your time, especially for legacy applications. So anyways, we're going to learn how to use GitHub next week and do a deployment. So that is also going to be required. That covers 2 steps because your code has to live on GitHub, and then your URL that you're going to provide me for your project will be your live application. Okay? We're also going to learn how to link up
MySQL and all that type of stuff, because you'll have to use a remote MySQL. All that, we're going to learn all that next week. We have a full dedicated 3 hours. If it takes us an hour, it takes us an hour. If it takes us 3 hours, it takes us 3 hours. All members of your group must contribute equally, and to make sure of that, I'm forcing evaluations for each group member, because what I find happens is a group will form up with 3 people, somebody will ask to join a group or whatever last second, and then that person, you never see them again. And then all of a sudden Todd's there on mark day and wants a mark for it, right? And you're like, dude, you did nothing. So this way I know that. This is how you tell me that. Only one group member needs to submit the link in the GitHub, though, because I'm basically going to see the submission, mark the submission off, and then once I hit a link in a GitHub repo, then I'm going to go check code. GitHub, just so you know, even when you submit your project, you're only submitting the GitHub link, right? And students learn very early on that, hey, even though I submitted the link, I can still keep pushing code to GitHub. However, there's an audit trail. So every time you push, it tells me that you've made a push to your audit, right, to your GitHub, and then I see timestamps. So if your timestamp is later than the code you submitted, right, I will go back in your commits and pull the commit that is before the due date, which means not the most recent code will get marked, the commit before the due date will get marked. We'll talk more about commits next week. But just keep in mind that don't try to push code after the date thinking it's going to get marked, because it won't. What else? Link to your working online application. Working is bolded because working is important. There is 484 marks for the whole project, based on different criteria in each file. You'll see that. There's also a total at the bottom of each file. But in addition, there is a few other marks, which I'll talk about a little further down. But suffice to say, a non-working application can cost you up to 80 of those marks. Okay, so it has to work. README text file with your group members listed and what their roles were. So I mean that fairly loosely. I imagine like you can, all 3 people could be coders, right? If that's what you want. But maybe you have like a project manager who kind of like arranged it, a graphic designer, whatever. You can have fun with that one. What else? You cannot. This is super, super important. And I feel like I have to explicitly state this because it happens every semester. You cannot have more than 3 members in a group, which I just said. You cannot copy any project, assignment, lab, lesson files from any online learning resources. So that means like going to Coursera and downloading a project. This includes going to lynda.com and following the online lessons and doing the project. That is still considered academic misconduct, just so you are fully aware. You cannot submit those because it's technically not your code. It's lynda.com's code, right? Even though you went through the lessons, it's still lynda.com's code. So not that I'm saying discouraging you from that. You should do those things. You should learn, but just don't submit it as a project. Any online learning resources, any online repositories. So once you learn about GitHub, I'm sure you're going to find out more about GitHub, that there's people's projects up there and stuff like that. You can't submit somebody else's project as your own. And from a contracting resource like Fiverr, and it's very obvious. If I get code that I find feels unbelievable, that a first-year student handed this code base in, I'll ask you very cool questions that you have to answer. And if you can't answer those questions, I'm going to tell you that that code's not yours, right? So I will make you vet your code. That's only happened twice where I've had to do that. Copy any project lab files from another student. Because GitHub is public, it can also be private. I will show you guys how to make private repos so your code is secure to you and nobody else can see your code. But because it can be public as well, there is obviously the concern of copying code from another student, okay? I don't like that. It gets really annoying because it's a matter of he said, she said kind of thing. So if that happens, it's usually a 0 for both parties, and then we have to bring that up to your project coordinator. So just avoid it altogether. You must do your own work, obviously. And this is the other thing, too. All the projects are the same. They're all the same thing that you're building. However, I don't expect, out of 2 classes, 30 projects that look identical. They should all be different. Everybody codes differently. Everybody does variables differently. Some people do 2 spaces, some people do tabs, there's so many differences that it doesn't take more than 2 seconds to realize that 2 people copied from each other because the code feels familiar, and I usually go figure it out. And then once I find it, you get a 0. So just avoid that. Have another student complete your project for you. I've had this happen once. It was a bullying thing too, which was super weird. And I failed them for the course and then told Ross, and they got failed for the program. So that's like a big bad no. But I feel like I'll put it there just in case it's an issue. Not that you guys seem like that at all. You seem like a real super friendly bunch. So I don't think you're bullying people. Here's the breakdown, basically. I will put a more detailed rubric up, but really there's not really necessity for it because all the information you need to know about what to do in each file is in the file itself. So there's a project part 1 SQL that you will have to complete and load up. So yes, you will have to write your own SQL. I'm not going to provide you SQL. So I don't think I did. No, I didn't. I told you what to write, but I didn't provide you SQL. There's going to be a connect.php, a header.php, and a footer.php. So not next week, but the following week after that, we're going to learn how to write include files, which is basically writing a file and including its contents in multiple places within our application. That being said, though, you can still write all of your application without those include files. And then when we learn how to do that, you can implement that step. The index.php file, which will be your entry point, new.php, insert.php, notification.php, edit, update, delete. All those files are files that we're going to be implementing pretty much at the end of today. We'll have most of those files. The only file we'll be missing is the index.php, but we will be creating that next week when we deploy to Heroku, because Heroku requires an index.php to figure out what the heck it is you're trying to build. So it will need that index.php file. We're also you're going to provide the GitHub link, and notice these marks are fairly hefty. These ones right here. So it's a 30% loss if you fail to deploy your application like up to GitHub. Push to GitHub, and it's a failure of 50 marks if your application doesn't have an online link. Incidentally, this happens all the time. People confuse what I mean by the online link, and they like to submit me their Heroku dashboard link, which I have no access to because I'm not you and I don't have your login credentials. So I will show you what link I want, and you need to either write it down or whatever it is it takes for you to remember that so that you guarantee give me the right link. We'll explore that next week. The 4 operations that have to complete is I have to be able to view all rows of whatever resource it is that we're working with. I think it's superheroes. I have to be able to create a new row. I have to be able to edit an existing row, which you're going to learn to do today. And I have to be able to delete an existing row, which you're also going to learn today. So as long as I can commit those 4 actions, then those 80 points are basically yours, right? What else? That's basically it. Any questions? No? You can work alone. Everybody asks me that for some reason. They're just like, I can't find a group. You don't need a group. You can do this alone. And realistically, you can probably do this whole project, I would say, in a Saturday. Like, it's not hefty by any means. It's worth 10% of your final grade, so you don't want to leave it. But yeah, you can definitely work alone on it if that's what you choose to do. I do like it when people work in groups, though, because it means I have to mark less, right? So, but yeah, do what you need to do. Cool. If you have any questions at all, you can always contact me on Slack. I noticed some of you have actually started doing that, which is awesome. Or you can contact me by email, which is a little slower, but you get the idea. Or you can just talk to me after class or ask now if you have any questions. No? Us? Yeah. From the final course mark, it's 10% of your whole course. Yeah. So project part 1 will be 10% and project part 2 will be 10%. So 20% is the total marks. And then the labs make up 30%. So if you've been skipping labs, I suggest you stop. And then the quizzes make up 20%, but you can get actually 24% out of them because there's 12 of them or something like that. Yeah. And then the rest will be tests. So the tests are fairly heavily focused in this course. So 30% of your total mark will be the 2 tests. There's a breakdown. If you are curious about the breakdowns of your course, if you go to the syllabus for winter 2020, there is the evaluation breakdown right here. In-class quizzes are 20%, 10 for each project, 30 for labs,
midterm is 15, final is 15. That's the breakdown. So there's a lot of markables. I find that I used to not do so many markables. I used to do like 2 big projects and 2 labs, and that was basically it. And people were failing left, right, and center. It's weird, but humans need constant, like, do this thing in order to help reinforce it. So, sorry, guys. But yeah. All right, cool. Let's talk a little bit about what we did last week. I mean, we did some awesome stuff, right? We created some countries. Here we go. We created some countries last week, right? We talked about why we need a database, that it's our only way to basically create persistent data, no matter whether you shut the computer off, right, or you go to a different computer entirely. This is our way of keeping our data persistent across application use. So yeah, database is really handy. A lot better than working with a file system because the database can actually be queried easily using different database query languages, whereas a file system is a lot trickier to work with unless you get into like Hodak or whatever, and those are really complex file system databases. We talked a little bit about atomic data, which is really just taking data in a database and making sure it's in its most finite form, obviously within reason. So for example, instead of storing name as just name, right, which can be literally first, last, middle, whatever, right, plus your titles, we store it instead as first and last name, which makes searching for all the Smiths in our database a lot easier. Um, or contact information, breaking it out by phone number, email. That comes in really handy when you want to email your whole customer base. If you don't have to try to somehow figure out whether their email is in the contact form or whatever else, right? Makes your lives a little simpler. We also talked about books, for example, with books and author. We would need a huge text block in order to store all the books, which, in the long run becomes really silly because if you want to go find a particular book, you have to search through this massive text block to go find it. And honestly, that's not efficient. It would take a long time, especially if you're trying to do analysis on a lot of data and you're doing this for every author, that would take forever. So by separating books into its own table and then creating like a connection to the authors table, it makes life a little simpler for us, right? Because it means that we have a connection back to the author. If we want all the books from this author, we just literally have to find all the books with that author's ID, and we can pull them all back. I don't expect you to fully understand that yet. It's not even on today's quiz. It's really just, hey guys, we're going to do this in the future. That's really what it's about. So it kind of keeps it in the back of your head. Whole idea is planning a database is really important. We created our simple database in Workbench. Everybody had a working database by the end of class last week, unless somebody's missed class. I don't think anybody did in here. We talked about inserts, and inserting from PHP, not very difficult. There is, some things that we have to pay attention to, like the name attribute inside our form is required because it's the only way that our values from our form get to the server side, right? Because what happens is that form gets turned into a post object, and all of those name fields here that you see here become the keys of the post object, and then the value that was put inside the form field becomes the value. So that's where all that comes from. It comes from that particular data source. Inserting, always involves basically the same operations: connect to the database, form your SQL statement, execute your SQL statement, and then check if it worked, right? So 4 things that you'll do all the time. And you can see that here we're connecting to our MySQL database using localhost. That's going to change next week when we start connecting with Heroku. We're going to learn about something called environment variables, which is a way to protect our data, or like our credentials. And so this won't necessarily be localhost. It'll be whatever the Heroku server address is. And then we built our query. Now in here, it's inline inside the function, but when we did it in class, we just created a SQL variable and stored it inside the SQL variable. The query itself, the really only change from the query that we built in class versus the query that you guys did in your SQL class is the fact that we're using string templates and we can put a variable directly in there to be parsed so that we can insert dynamic data. That way when we submit the form, we can also submit the data and add it to the insert statement. These insert statements also, they're basically like, I think I asked you guys last week if you'd ever heard of eval or know what eval is. Almost every language supports this command called eval. And what the idea of eval is that I can take a string, right, with commands in that language, and I can run eval on that string, and it will execute it just as if it was regular syntax. So you can kind of see how that might be a little bit dangerous, and that's why a lot of people will call it evil eval, because if you take user information that they provided you and you just execute it with eval, I mean, they're doing this to your server, right? So whatever commands that they've decided to execute, you're executing against your server. And the same goes with these post commands that we're just plugging in here. This is not the way we should be doing this, and we're going to discontinue that in about 5 weeks. I'm going to show you how to do validation, sanitization, and normalization. And the reason is because it doesn't take much for somebody in that first post name there to write semicolon, drop database, semicolon, and then you run it, and now you've dropped the database, right? So you got to keep that in mind. We definitely don't want to be just plugging raw user data in here, but we're learning. It's simplicity. It's easier to understand that than it is to understand validation and sanitization at this point. But we are going to definitely cover that. So we insert the data into our tables. We built very simple error handling, basically just checking if the response from the query is true or false. If it's false, then we query the database for an error, right? And say, hey, did you get any errors on the last query? And it returns yes or no with the actual error message. Cool. And then other than that, we built a table, right? And started displaying the actual result sets, which is like a learning process for you guys because it's like this, the third table we've built, and it's like your third table you've built in HTML altogether. So, you've got the HTML side to it as well, but it's also the first time that we started integrating PHP directly into HTML. So the PHP you see here is actually embedded right inside the HTML. And basically what happens is the parser will parse the PHP, whatever gets returned back will get inserted into place, and then all the HTML gets sent to the server. And that's a good thing to try to remember. The PHP is first, the HTML response is second. So whatever PHP you type has to occur first, okay? So anyways, this is a for each loop. This for each iterates over the rows that we retrieve from the database. As it's iterating over the rows, it takes each row and casts it into this variable called row, and then passes it into what these curly braces are, which is known as, does anybody remember what I called it last week? It starts with a B. A block. Yeah, exactly. It's a block. And so the block, this row now becomes available to the block, and so we're able to output this information. I like to call this a throwaway variable because you're using it just for that process, and then you're resetting it on the next iteration. You just keep doing that. And then when you're done, you stop using it. You don't use it after that. So it's like a throwaway variable. Yeah, that was basically it. And then we did the lab. And by the lab, it looked like everybody did well. I mean, I can't think of anybody standing out that didn't do well. So it looks like you're kind of getting it. Your test marks kind of say that you guys are getting it. Anybody have any questions about this stuff that we did last week before we enter into today's stuff? No? Cool. All right, so the quiz is up as well, just to let you know. Like I said last week, though, I'm not going to do the quiz during class. Feel free to do the quiz sometime between now and midnight. We're cool. You can even do it at the break if you want. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Also, there is Lab 4 posted as well. It's already open. I know some of you like to do Lab 4 early, so it's open, ready to go when you guys are ready. And the instructions are there. Lab 4 will be just a continuation of Lab 3. So the stuff we're going to cover today, which is update, edit, and delete, is in Lab 4. Awesome. Cool. It's nice to get all that homework out of the way. Let's go to lesson 4, which is our today's lesson. So like I said, we've been doing CRUD. We started with create and read, create being us actually creating brand new countries in our database, and read being the table that we use to show all those countries, right? Read isn't necessarily just focused to showing a table
of data. You might show that as a list, you might use it as to show a template of something, but the idea is still there. Showing something visually is really what you're trying to do. But that requires reading data. Reading data means you're not mutating or creating data, right? That's the important concept about reading data. Reading data means that you're retrieving data from the database, but you're not doing anything destructive. And even though destructive is kind of the word, you're not creating, you're not updating, you're not deleting, you're not creating those processing type steps. Before we actually start updating and deleting, it's kind of important to know how we would build our navigation in this scenario. So when we're building the nav for our app, right, so that the user can navigate around our application, right now we would have two links. We would have a link to the table to show them all the countries in the table so that they could get to the table and see all those countries. And we would have a link to create a new country. That's it, just two links, that's it. So if they want to edit or delete, we need to give them a way to be able to do that. And the easiest way to do that is by creating actions in our table. And the reason why we're doing that is because the edit and the delete are not like a global thing. They are unique to the row that they want to edit or delete. So when you think of the countries, right, in the table, if you want, you can go ahead and open up WAMP, boot up your servers so that you got them running. Once my server starts here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Totally forgot the link. There we go. So here's lesson 3. Here's the table. So when we look at this table, we have lists of countries, right? Mine's gotten quite a bit longer since last week, but we've got lists of countries here, right? Their descriptions, their population. If I want to edit Canada, right, it's much easier for me to put a link in this row with a reference to that row in the link than it would be to create an edit page and you would have to go select that row or something like that. I'll just create a link that just points to the same page and pulls in the correct data for it. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're actually going to build some links. We're going to add another column here called actions, and we're going to build an edit and delete link for each one of these rows. And these will be some of the first dynamic links we've created. And in order to understand how we're doing this and what we're trying to achieve, and this seemed to be a difficult thing for Monday to grasp. And that being fair, it's a difficult thing for most people to grasp, really. It's based on these query strings that we talked about in week 2 when we started talking about super globals, right? So the query string is where this question mark starts after the domain and then all this stuff that you see after that. It's super important in this scenario where we're going to be editing because what we need to do is tell the edit form what we want to edit. And the easiest way to do that is just pass the ID. Pass the ID of the row and then the edit form knows what data to pull, right? So the query string that you can see here has my name in it, has my age in it, and has my marital status in it as well. This information, when we pass it on to the next page as the destination, it gets converted into our get super global. Name, age, and married become the keys of the super global, and Sean McKinnon, 41 and true become the values of the super global, which is what we saw in week 2. So if you're still struggling with this particular strategy, then I would recommend going to lesson 2 and reading about query strings again and making sure you fully understand that because we will be using them quite often. We're not passing a ton, like we will likely never use the ampersand. We're really just going to pass ID equals and then whatever the row ID is. So obviously demonstration sometimes works better than explanation. If you click on the W, if you're in XAMPP, you'll have to navigate to your XAMPP folder. If you're in MAMP, you'll have to navigate to your MAMP folder. We're going to go to the www directory. That opens up your project directory in here, the ones that actually get served to the Apache server. Go ahead and double click on COMP-1006. I'm going to delete this. Whoops, how come it didn't delete? Oh, it did delete. That was weird. We're going to click on lesson 3. Control C on Windows, Command D on Mac, which is really awesome because it'll actually duplicate the folder for you immediately.
Control V on Windows so that you can paste it. And then we're going to rename it. And the easiest way to rename it, if you're on a Mac, just click on the folder and hit enter, and then you can rename it. If you're in Windows, click once, wait like a second, and then click again, and you'll be able to rename the file. Or just right click and rename. That also works. And we're going to call it lesson 4. We're duplicating because the insert, the table, the new form, all that stuff we're carrying over. Once you've done that, go ahead and right click on the folder and choose to open with code. And at some point it'll open. Oh yeah, it did. Just open on the wrong side. There we go. And what we're going to do is under our examples folder here, we're going to open up our table. So our table file, pretty straightforward. We have our connection at the top here that connects to our database. We have our query that selects all the columns from the countries table. And then we do a fetch and convert the results into a MySQL associated array. It's actually an array of MySQL associated arrays. Now, it was kind of interesting. On Monday, we talked about this little asterisk. And I was surprised that what they thought it meant. I'm just curious, what do you guys think that asterisk means? It's what? All what? Yes, spot on. It's all of the columns from the database, but most of Monday thought it was all of the rows, that it meant it was selecting all the rows in the database. But it's not. It's actually selecting all of your columns. And you can change that asterisk to be more specific. If you don't want the ID column and you don't need created at or updated at, you could say name, comma, description, comma, population. And it would only return back those 3 columns back to you. And as you start working more and more with database data, being more specific is better because you create more security by being more specific, right? So it's something that we'll probably do later, not right now, but it is something to be aware of what that star means. So anyways, we get back all the rows. We have them all stored in here. It's now an array of each row. We have some styling there. We have our column names. And then we have our for each loop where we iterate through the rows and we display each row inside this wonderful echo statement. Yay, yes. So our next step is to add 2 links, but in order to do that, we're going to create a new column in our database or in our HTML table, and then in the body, we're going to create a new cell that contains the 2 links that we're going to create. So let's scroll up to our T head, right? Put our cursor right after population, right after the TH tag, and hit enter to create a new line. Here we're going to create a new heading, and we're going to call it actions. And that'll create a new column in our HTML table. So our next step is to add some cells underneath it. Right now we have 1, 2, 3 columns, right? The first column contains all of our names. The second one is the descriptions. The third one is populations. Now we're going to add another echo statement here for the opening TD tag. And then one below it, and you can do Alt-Shift down if you want to just duplicate it, with the closing TD tag. So we need these 2 TD tags, and that will create a new cell inside our HTML table. It's actually going to create several cells because we're looping, right? So once you've created the opening tag and the closing tag, we're now ready to write our first link, which we'll write inside this tag here, or in this echo statement here. You guys know how to create a link, right? What's the HTML tag for a link? It's an A, right? Yeah, it's an A tag. href is our attribute that we need. You can't use double quotes here, use single quotes in there. And then we'll create the closing tag as well. So far, all we've written there is HTML. And we're using PHP to spit it out, but we're just writing HTML. In between the opening and closing anchor link is the actual anchor's label, right? It's what the user will see when they go to see the link. And we want to be super descriptive here. Edit. Can't make a mistake about what that's doing. If we had like a library like Font Awesome or something like that, we could actually put a little icon in there, like a pencil or something. But I think that's good enough. We might do that later on. And the href in between the two single quotes, we'll write our link, and we'll use a relative URL, right? So relative means relative to the directory I'm in. And the way we signify that is with a dot and a slash. That says, starting in the directory that this file I'm currently editing is located in, access the page called edit.php. And so right now, if we were to click that link, it would just go to edit.php. We would get no extra information, right? It would just be directly to edit.php. But we want to tell edit.php, yeah, whatever row it is that we want to edit, right? So the way we're going to do that is edit.php question mark. That says, hey, this is a query string. ID, not DI, wrong word. ID, there we go. Less die, more id. ID, that's going to be our parameter, right? That'll get added to the get super global. ID equals, I can hear it right now. You guys are like, get on with it, dude. Curly braces, because we're actually going to add some inline variable parsing here. $row, just like we did in the top ones up there. ID dash square brackets. So this is going to be the ID for that row. Congratulations, you just created a dynamic link. This link is different, not much different, but it is different for every single row that we display on the page, because each one will have a different ID. And that's important because when we actually open up edit.php, we need that ID in order to fetch the correct row. Now, the cool thing is this link is identical to the delete link, except for instead of edit, it's delete. You can Alt-Shift down if you want to just duplicate it, but I'll type it out again just so we go through that whole step and it becomes more reinforced in your memory. So again, we're going to create an href with single quotes and a closing tag. This one's going to have the label delete or destroy, totally up to you. Terminate, whatever you want. Carry, doesn't matter. // delete.php, right? That's going to be the name of the page. Then we want to add the query parameter again so that we know which row we want to delete, because we don't want to just delete all of them. We want to delete one specific one. So question mark, ID equals, and a set of curly braces. Those curly braces are super important because they tell the PHP parser that it needs to parse the variable inside here. And we have to use that when we're doing associative array references. And the reason is because if you try to just type out the associative array there, the PHP parser doesn't know what to do with it. The curly braces almost encapsulate it in its own little parsing block, right? And then you can go ahead and parse it. Usually I find it's just a better idea to get into the habit of always using them, even when you're just outputting a regular variable, because then you don't forget, right? You don't forget when you need to use them, because it'll work for either. So $row, right? And then the reference
of which key we want to use, which is the ID. Now, when this displays in the browser, it's going to say edit delete. We want to put some separation between the words edit and delete, so it doesn't say edit delete. So the way we're going to do that is on the next line. I thought that was funny. Whatever. Anyways, dad jokes. Put a space, the pipe character. Now here's an interesting thing for you that have international keyboards, and you would know exactly what I'm talking about because you've had to deal with the Raspberry Pi. The pipe character on international keyboards is your left Alt key and the tilde, which you can find under the escape key. Those of you with a US keyboard, it's literally underneath your backspace. Just hold shift and hit the backslash. Super frustrating when you're trying to write shell commands on the Raspberry Pi. You need a pipe character. All right. I mean, let's go see this. We can't go anywhere because none of these pages exist. We're just going to get 404s, but at least we can see our artwork. It's not really art. Let's go to lesson 4. So back up a bit. Go to lesson 4. Where the heck are you going? Let's try that again. There we go. Lesson 4, examples, table.php. If you did it correctly, you should see all these lovely little edit links, right? Go ahead and click on an edit link, and you should get a not found. And why are we getting a not found? Exactly. Simple as that. Page doesn't exist, right? I mean, it even tells you that. Not found on this server. Just replace the word URL with page. There we go. Let's go ahead and create that page. We'll open up our sidebar here, right-click on examples and choose new file, and we'll create a page called edit.php. And we could write all the HTML, but I don't want to. So we're going to click on form. We're going to hit Control A or Command A if you're on a Mac, which will select everything inside the editor. Control C, which will copy everything that you just selected into your clipboard. By the way, these commands work in all applications. Jump over to edit.php and Control V to paste everything. So your edit.php and your form.php should be identical now. So once again, form.php, Control A to select everything, Control C to copy it all to your clipboard, jump over to edit.php, and Control V to paste, and everything will paste inside. You'll know you did it correctly when it says new country at the top of the file in the edit.php file. And then save for good measure. I showed you guys how to do multi-cursor, right? But have I showed you how to do multi-select? So multi-select's kind of handy. Double-click on new. We need to change the word new to edit, but we got to do it in 2 places, and we're super lazy programmers. So double-click new. Hit Control D on your keyboard, which will auto-select the other new. So now both news are selected, and you have 2 cursors blinking. Once again, that was Control D. And then type in edit. You're now typing edit in 2 places. And you just replace the words on both of those. If you want to get rid of your 2 cursors, you can either click anywhere else or hit escape. That will also get rid of the 2 cursors. So there's our edit. We have one more thing too. Our form action isn't going to point to insert.php because if we were to send the form data in insert.php, what's going to happen? It's going to create a new country with that form data, right? We don't want that to happen. So we're going to change insert.php to update.php. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to maintain a separation between actions. Forms are meant to collect data and only collect data. That's their only purpose. So what they're doing has nothing to do with updating, mutation, deletion, anything, creating, right? Their only purpose is to collect data. Where we send that data to, that's the processor, right? That's the processing, and the processing is responsible for doing any data manipulation, whether that's creating, updating, or deleting, okay? Forms for collection, processes for processing. Maintain that. If I get files from people for projects or labs that have the file do the whole action within one file, you'll definitely lose marks. Forms for collecting data, processes for doing processing. All right, so we're going to point to an update.php. We will create that later when it comes time. Right now, we'll just get a 404 when we submit, which is fine. Let's scroll down a little bit. Everything in the form itself doesn't change. We're going to add an attribute to it, but we're not going to take anything away. Before we add the attribute, we actually need to go get the data. So right now, you don't need to switch over, but I'm going to switch over to my browser and show you what I mean here. Right now, this form is empty, and that's really not a good user experience, right? So the user in the table page said, I want to edit Iceland, right? It's full of sheep. I want to change full of sheep to full of goats. So they click edit, and then they're like me, who has like a 3-second fish memory, and can't remember what row they actually clicked edit on, right? So now I'm here and I have no idea which row it is. I only wanted to edit the description, but in order to make sure that all this data gets put into the database properly, I have to make sure all 3 of these fields are done, like they're all filled out. And this is because of the way, the strategy we're using to do updates. We're doing something called nuke and pave. How many of you have heard of the term nuke and pave? So here's what nuke and pave basically means. It means this is going to say Iceland still. This is going to have something different in it. And this is still going to say 60,000. The name and the population will not have changed. The data inside them will remain the same. However, when we go to update the database, we're still going to update all 3 fields. We're not going to go check to see if it's changed because it's inefficient. We have to do a call for that. We have to say, hey, is your data currently this data? I mean, who cares? We're populating the same data back in again. If the user didn't want the same data, they would have changed it, right? So we're going to basically say these 3 fields are going to already contain the data that is necessary. When we go to update the data in the database, we are going to nuke the database table, like the field, with the data that's currently in it, and we're going to pave over it with the exact same data. Nuke and pave. Very common strategy. Even more common is nuke and paving entire tables, or nuke and paving entire databases, which we do in our own system. You can do it on grander scale. Sometimes it just makes more sense than to try to go figure out what needs to be changed. All right, so before we do that, we want to pre-populate these fields so the user knows what they're actually editing. And we do that by adding in an attribute into these fields called value. I'm going to write a value in there. And value kind of works like placeholder. So placeholder gives a hint to the user about what should be in the field. Value hard codes a value into the field. You can change the value, but the value is there. It's hard-coded. When you submit a form, all of your placeholder values never get passed on. I'm not sure if you guys knew that, but all the placeholder values never actually make it back to the server because the server doesn't care about those. But this field, this attribute, will get carried on as the actual value of the field. Okay, so that's important to understand. Do any of you have text areas in your forms, or is it all inputs? No text areas, right? Okay. Mondays had some text areas. I don't know why. So go ahead and add the value attribute to all 3 fields. And for now, we'll just leave it blank. So now we want to pre-populate this with the row that we selected's data. right? We want to make sure that the data from the row we selected gets populated into these values. So first, we're going to actually have to get the data. So let's go to the very top of our page. And this is going to feel extremely familiar because it's exactly the same thing we did with the table, right? I'm going to go and fetch some stuff. That's funny. Why am I editing things like that? All right, whatever. So our first step, our database connection. So let's create a connection to our database. So $con equals MySQL I underscore connect. The host name will be localhost. The username will be root. The password will be null unless your database requires a password, which some of you do. And the database name will be lesson_3. If you're on a Mac, your local host will be likely localhost :8889, not just localhost. Lesson 3, we're still using the same database. Yeah. Yeah, that was confusing for Monday too. I had a whole bunch of lesson 4s. Easy to solve, just there was a whole bunch of them. All right, now our fetch the rows spot. There we go. First, we have to get the result. So the result is really just us adding the MySQL query to the database. We say, hey, database, I want to select all the countries that are currently in the database. And we send that off to the database. And the database returns back a result object. The kind of nasty part about that is you can't really do anything with the result object. Your actual results, the rows themselves, aren't in there yet. No, for that, we have to do another query, kind of. We have to do another command, another function that then populates it with all the rows, right? So just like table, it's a two-step process. It's no different than what we did in table. However, this time we're not fetching all of the rows, right? Sorry, fetch the row spot because we only want one row. We're only editing one row. Just Iceland. That's the only row I'm editing. So we're going to fetch the row. So MySQL I query, right? So that'll be the same. First argument is the connection. So it knows where to connect to actually process the query. And then the second argument is the SQL statement itself, which just goes into a string. Just like in the table, select all columns, right? Star from countries. So right now that would be every single row in our database because that's what meets that query. If we want to reduce and filter the query, which is what we want to do, we need to add a where clause. So where, and what is my where clause? Yep, ID equals something that's going to go in these curly braces. Query parameters get added to the URL, all right? So right now in our URL, it says question mark ID equals 10. How do I get that parameter? What super global variable do I use to access the ID that's currently sitting in that URL? $underscore, yes. $_get will have that ID in it for us. So that's exactly what we're going to type here. $_get, our brackets, right? And then the index we want to access, which is ID. So that whole part right there. So whatever that value is, whether it's 195, doesn't matter, it's going to take the value from there and run the query. Now here's where you're going to have a problem. A lot of Monday kept navigating to edit.php directly, and they were missing the query string. Remember the lab you guys did where if post wasn't already had a value in it, it would blow up and you get a bunch of errors? the same thing will occur, because if you go to edit.php and you don't have the question mark ID equals blah, this variable that's currently highlighted will cause a reference error saying this hasn't been defined. So how do you stop that? Don't go to edit.php directly. That's how you stop that. Go from the links that we created in the table. So don't navigate to edit.php directly. Click the links in the table, because the links in the table are already formatted with the ID equals whatever. So you don't have to worry about that missing. I'll show you what I mean. So if I jump, actually let's add the next piece to this, which is row equals, and because we're only getting one, it's MySQL I fetch, and this is a new one, association, right, or ASOC, $result. So in the table one, we did all here. This one, we just do association, and notice we don't need the constant as the second argument because it's already coming back as an associated row. So this won't be an array with rows inside of it, it'll just be the row. Sorry, dry. And then we'll dump that out. Go ahead and do a var dump, or a dump, our quick and dirty debugger. And then let's go see if this puppy works. So let's Alt-Tab over to our browser, go over to our table here, right, and click on one of your links. If you did it correctly, you should see the array with ID, name, description, population, created at, and updated at. So it's already an associative array, right? Notice it's not an array inside of an array. It's a singular array. However, our form is still not populated because we haven't actually taken those values and put them into the fields yet. We'll do that next. But the one thing I want to show you that a lot of the people on Monday were doing is they were navigating to edit.php without the query string. And they would get this. And the reason why you get that is, as it says right here, undefined index ID on line 6. And if you go to line 6, which is this line right here, you can see, here's my get variable. I'm trying to access ID from it, but it doesn't exist because the query parameter is missing. So the rule, like the goal of the story here is always start from table.php, because if you notice and you look at the status bar, every one of these has a query parameter already in it, has the query string, they're already built because we did that in our table. Yep, it has to have the question mark ID equals. Now that's the thing, like if you were to go to edit.php directly, but add the ID equals, and even if it was some stupid number that doesn't actually exist, you won't get an error, but you will notice that it's null, right? Because there's no field in that database called 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. All right, we want to make sure that we can actually see our data. So I'm going to go back to editing Iceland. And right now our form is empty. So I want to populate the form. So I'm going to come down here. So remember, this variable row currently contains the row, right? So row name would contain the name in that row. Row description would contain that value. So to add that information into our value columns, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The long way, which we've been doing so far, which is bracket, question mark, PHP, echo, $row, name, closing. That's the long way we've been doing it. Every time we want to echo out some PHP, we do it that way. The shorthand way, because this is such a common operation, this whole bit right here, and you're going to do it so often, the shorthand version of it is bracket, question mark, equals sign, which means PHP echo. It's like that whole 7 characters, $row, description. closing PHP block. I prefer this, but I don't care what you use. If you find that the echo statement is clear to you, use the echo statement. One gotcha here that I find a lot of students do is they put a space between the question mark and the equal sign. That means something completely different. It means space is a variable you created and it is equal to the value of row description. That's an assignment, and space can't be a variable name, so you get an error. You have to make sure the equals is right against the question mark for the syntax to work properly. Oh, why did I do this? How did I start so far down? This is population. This is description. Sheesh. Sorry, you don't have to what? And then this would be name. There we go. Now we're on the right track. There. No, so that's the cool thing about PHP, and that's actually true with all PHP. When you have this opening and closing bracket, it is automatically assumed that your last statement is terminated. So the last statement is always automatically assumed that it's terminated. So when you use this nice inline, you can get away with not using the semicolon. That being said, some people prefer to use the semicolon because it just kind of gets them in the habit of always terminating their statements. But this is known as a self-terminating statement because it's only one line. Not true in languages like Java or C++, those you definitely can't forget the termination. But in PHP, you can. We have one more issue, and that is that when we send this data over to update, it needs to know what row to update. Currently, based on the information we have, we could probably easily deduce which row we're updating by just the name, right? But that's not a guarantee. We could potentially, because of how flexible our table is, we could potentially have two rows called Canada. In fact, I think I do actually have two rows called Canada. Because of that, we need to be able to tell update which one we want to actually edit, right? Because it doesn't know. So we need to add a field inside our form with the ID in it so that it knows which one to update. Now, fields by default are text. So when you add an input field into your form here, it's going to be by default a text field. Okay, not a super big deal, right? So we can add text there, for example. We still need to give it a name, so we'll give it a name of ID, and we'll pre-populate the value $row ID. Now there is a flaw to this, and that's that the user is going to see the ID column. That's one flaw. Not that it's a big deal that they see the ID column. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference. We're not really going to lose or gain any security by not showing it. The other issue is text boxes are editable, meaning that they can modify the value in the text box. So when this loads and the ID column is there, there's a number in there, and more than likely they'll put a different number in there because users are users, and that's exactly what they do. They just fill stuff out. So if you look at the table, I'm just going to jump and then I'll jump right back, I promise. If you look at the table now, you can see that all of our fields are filled, but now we have this column or this field at the top with the number 10 in it, which reflects the 10 that's currently inside our URL. I want to hide this so that the user doesn't accidentally fill it out. And the way I hide it is instead of using type text, it's Alex, right? Instead of using type text, like Alex said, we use a hidden, we hide it. So we change text to hidden, and now the field will actually disappear. It's still there, it's still in the background. They can still modify it too, actually. They can just go through the inspector and hard code change the value in it, or they can use JavaScript and change the value in it. So it's like it's not 100% guaranteed anyways, but at least you've done your due diligence, right? At least it's a good user experience at the end of the day. So now if you jump back to your browser, you can see the field has disappeared, but it is still there. The value is still there. When we submit our form, it will actually still send the ID value to the server, which is what we want. So that way we can go look up the row so we can edit it. All right, let me alt tab back. We have one more step, mostly because it's just triggering my OCD. We don't want to call it a create button. It's an update button. Let's change the button to update. All right, let's fill out our form. Make sure you refresh. That way any changes we've made are there, right? So I've got Iceland. I'll keep it Iceland. I'm going to change it full of sheep to full of goats. And then I'm ready to click update. And not found. And why is it not found? Because we are missing the update.php page. So let's open up our sidebar, right click on examples, choose new file, and put in an update.php page. And then while we're there, why don't we create an opening PHP tag, and we will dump, using var dump, the post super global so we can see its contents. As soon as we're done update.php, we'll take a break. 15 minutes. It'll be soon. So now that you've got posts in there, just alt tab back to your page, hit Control R, and it will ask you to submit the form. Say OK. And you should see ID, name, description, and population inside the post field. Yes. So now we can use the ID in order to look up in the database and find the field that we want to update and update it. Now, when you install MySQL, there's a few options you can install it with, and WAMP kind of takes care of this for you. I think XAMPP does as well, and I'm pretty sure MAMP I think might actually be in non-strict mode. But most of them are in strict mode, and strict mode will actually prevent you from updating every row in the database accidentally. When we run the update command, you know the where clause we use on select statements? We actually need to use that on the update statement too. In non-safe mode, if you don't have that and you just say update countries with these values, it will do that to every single row in the database and update every single row. If you were to run delete, it would delete every single row. So that where statement, super important. You have to have it. If you're in strict mode, you can't actually do an update or a delete without a where clause. You are required to have the where clause for it to work. If you're in non-strict mode, then it will operate. So that being said, let's go ahead and start writing our update. Our first is our connection, as always. We're going to connect using MySQLi, connect, localhost. You can always just copy and paste it from the top of any other of the 3 files we've done this in. And lesson_03. Yeah, yes, we have a connection. We'll actually separate our update in the notes. We don't, but we'll separate the SQL from the actual MySQL query. And you guys have done an update in your relational database class already, right? Like you've updated a row? No? Yes? Maybe? No? Some people say yes, some people say no, but you guys all have different teachers, so it's hard to say. All right, you're going to learn how to update a row. So when we insert a row, right, like we did last week, we did insert into countries. And one of my pet peeves about MySQL, or some languages in general, is inconsistencies in syntax. It's much easier to learn a syntax when they follow the same basic structure, right? So insert into countries, update into countries would make sense to me, but it's not called that. Instead, it's update countries set.
And then on the next line, we'll add in name equals a set of single quotations, description equals a set of single quotations, and population equals no quotations. I'll explain that in a second. Where ID equals no quotations. Don't worry, we're going to fill out all these little blanks. So unlike insert into, which you give it a list of columns and then a list of values, update requires you to list the column name and make it equal to something else. So there's a bit of an inconsistency there. You just have to keep that in mind. So name, the reason why I have these quotations is because name is a string, and MySQL does require you to quote strings, right? So if you're trying to insert or update a string, it has to be in quotes, right? Because I want to use my variable, right? Hence I'm using the double quotes here for string interpolation. I want to use my variable, I got to put the quotes in first, and it's usually a good idea to do that. So far, this is just SQL, right? Once I add the PHP in, it changes. So it's easier to kind of see where things go and what needs to be there before you type in the PHP. So now I'm going to add my curly braces in, which is going to set the parameters around parsing my variable. And I'm going to add $_post name. So there's my name field. In description, same thing, set of curly braces, $_post description. And then in population, I don't require quotations because population is an integer, right? So I just need the curly braces, $_post population. And then where ID equals, and again, that's a post field. So a set of curly braces. And again, no quotations because the ID is an integer. Oops, there we go. And that's our SQL statement. A good idea when you're doing debugging for a SQL statement, and I was troubleshooting some of Monday's stuff that they were having issues with, and a lot of it was that the post fields were empty. And I couldn't figure out at first why the post fields were empty, and it turned out they were going to update.php directly instead of submitting the form. If you don't submit the form, you don't create a post request, which means the data from the form doesn't go anywhere. If you go directly to update.php, you have no post data. You have a post variable, but it's empty, right? So what happens is all of these fields that you have in here would be completely empty. And so it wasn't executing, they were getting errors and they were getting frustrated. So what I suggested is that the echo out $SQL, and by echoing out $SQL, they can see what the SQL statement looks like. If it's got blank values, then it's because it's missing that data. So if you echo it out, you stand less of a chance of having an issue. Now we can go ahead and run our MySQL query. So we're going to store that in a variable so we can check to see if it worked. So $res equals, and I'll scroll up a little bit. There we go. $res equals MySQLi query. First argument is our connection. Second argument is our SQL statement. So that will send the SQL to MySQL, which will literally eval it, execute whatever's in there, including drop database if it happens to be in there, everything, and then return back a true or false on whether or not it worked. Then we can run our kind of crappy error handling here, but good enough. If $res, and we're doing $res, you can
If you want, do $res true if that's easier to understand what's happening there, but you don't need to. Either res has value or it's false. It's one or the other. So because of that, you can just evaluate res directly, and that's true for any programming language. We're going to echo because we're successful. The country was updated successfully. Else, echo, there was an error updating the record. I'm going to do a colon space. And unfortunately, we have to use concatenation. Concatenation is done with a dot, not a plus sign. MySQL I error, $con. One limitation to PHP's string templates is that it won't parse functions, which is kind of annoying, because many other languages that have string templates will actually support function parsing. So just walk through what we've done. We connected to our MySQL database. We wrote a SQL statement saying update countries, or update the table we want to update. Set the fields equal to these values. So set name equal to whatever the name value is in post, description to whatever the description value is in post, and population to whatever the population value is in post. And then we have a clause, right? So where ID equals post ID means it will only update rows in the database that have that ID as the value in their ID column. If it doesn't exist, it won't get updated. And then we're echoing out our SQL just to make sure it's working. And then we have our MySQL query, which actually executes the query. And then we have just kind of loose error handling here, where we just basically check to see if it worked. If it did, we echo out that it would happen successfully. Otherwise, we're going to error out. Let's go and test this, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. Come here. We can just refresh because the data is still there. Hit continue. Update country, set name to Iceland, description full of goats, population 60,000, where ID equals 10. And then there's our nice success message. The country was updated successfully. So if you have that, you're good. You can go ahead and have yourself a nice break. If you don't, you can meet me here and I'll help you. Let's start recording. There we go. All right, so we have our update. Our update is working for the most part. I think everybody's kind of got it operational again, hopefully. So our next step is going to be to create our delete. And our delete is actually very easy. Now, here's the thing. So far up to this point, we've always had like a form. This time we don't have a form because delete doesn't require one. Delete is just a link directly to the processing page that will actually remove the row. So if we look at our table, if we go back to our application and navigate to table.php, we have all these wonderful delete links. And like I said, I think I have some stupid ones, like Planet Hollywood is definitely not a country. So, and ASDF is definitely not a country. I'm going to delete ASDF, right? And I mean, who's heard of Greenland? But anyways, I'm going to click delete next to ASDF, and sure enough, not found, right? Let's go fix that problem first. I'm going to click the little brackets here, right click on examples, choose new file, and add a delete.php page. And hopefully you're starting to realize that as we write these files, they're basically the same. Like insert.php, update.php, and delete.php are basically identical. The only thing that has changed in all three files is what? What's the only thing that's changed in the three files? What's that, Taylor? The function? Yeah, the SQL, right? Like the SQL itself is the only thing that has changed in those three files. Nothing else has changed, right? So insert, update, and delete look identical except for the SQL. That is the only thing that has changed. So like I said, we're going to create this delete.php file in our examples folder. So we have a delete.php. And I'm encoding this file, same as any of the other ones, $con. Sorry, what am I forgetting?
Yippers, the PHP block. $con equals MySQL I connect the host, the user, the password, the database. So now that we have that connection, we're not going to have any values in here from post, but we definitely will have a get value. And just like edit.php, we can't navigate to this page directly because we have to have the query parameter. So super important that you need that query parameter. And again, we'll separate our SQL. So we have it, $SQL equals, I like that rhyme, MySQL I query. No, what am I doing? That's not right. Just a set of quotes. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. And I'm assuming if some of you haven't updated, you also haven't deleted. Have you learned delete? No? He says no. So we're going to delete. So delete from countries. So you're deleting from the table. And once again, if your database is set in safe mode, you can't just execute this query because it would literally delete every row in your database. Every single one. Safe mode should stop that. So if you want to delete, you need a where clause. Where ID equals, and we can get away with just doing the curly braces, $_get ID, which is coming from our query string. And then we'll echo this SQL statement so we know what it looks like. Now we're ready to run the actual MySQL query, which will store in a variable called res. This should all just feel basically just familiar because it's just $con, $SQL. And then our very simple error handling that we've done on every page. Echo, the country was deleted successfully. Otherwise, echo, there was an error deleting the row. Concatenate MySQL I error. $con. That's it. 16 rows, and I mean 2 of those we could get rid of, and a bunch of those are just new lines, so not very many rows at all in order to create a delete. So we connect, we write our SQL, delete from countries where ID is equal to a variable, right? That variable is being populated from the query string. So the query parameter that's in our URL called ID is where that value is coming from. If that's still causing issues and you're having difficulty understanding that, I recommend looking at lesson 2 where we talk about query strings. Okay. Then we do our MySQL query and we store whatever the return result, which would be either true or false, into a res variable. We check res to see if it's true or false. If it's true, it means that everything happened successfully, and we say the country was deleted successfully. Otherwise, we say there was an error deleting the country or the row, and we produce the error and show them what the error is. So if everything is working, is anybody still typing that out? Don't want to shift off. Okay, I'll give you a second to finish. Now, currently, we're kind of mixing disciplines a little bit. We're mixing view logic in with our processing logic. And we are going to look at that a little bit more in depth in a few minutes on why that is not good, why that is considered bad practice. It's as bad as including processing in your actions. Give me a thumbs up when you're done. Yeah. Good? All right. Good? Awesome. Alex, still just a second? Yeah, no worries, man. It did work? It didn't? Okay. You have port conflicts then. What I would recommend is if you go to the IT guys, they should be able to resolve your port conflicts. Worst case scenario, they can't. Meet me a little earlier next week for class, and then I'll give you a hand. I thought you were coming to the Monday class. No worries, man. Come to whatever one you can. Yeah. Cool. So let's Alt-Tab over to our browsers. Navigate to our table.php. We could refresh. I just don't want to because I can't remember what I was deleting. And we should be able to click the delete link. And if everything's good, you should get delete from countries where ID equals 7. The country was deleted successfully, or whatever number you chose to delete. I'll do another one. I'll click my back button. This time I'll choose Planet Hollywood and click delete, and off it goes. And then I can go back to table and we can see the change. Only you can't until I hit refresh and you actually see the proper change. There you go. So delete, very simple. Congratulations, you have now just done CRUD. You've done create, where you guys actually created new rows in the database. You've done read, where you're able to display the rows on a table, right? Like I said, table, maybe show it in a list, whatever, it doesn't matter. Reading is accessing data and putting it on the form. You've done read twice, actually. You did read in your table. Where else did you do a read? It's a trick question. Exactly. Edit.php, you also did a read. So you've done read twice. Then we did an update, right? And then we did a delete. So that's all of CRUD. We've done CRUD, but we've done it in a very simple way, and a lot of the stuff we've done is not necessarily best practice. So now we're going to start taking a look at correcting some of our mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes that we're going to talk about is about something called idempotence, which is kind of an interesting word. It's more complicated than what it actually is. It sounds more complicated than what it is. And really, it's about separating views from processes. So when we think about the stuff that we've built, right? Our first page that we built was the form.php page, which we built last week, right? The form.php's purpose was to collect information from the user so that we can submit it and enter it into our database. But that page's purpose was only to collect the information. That was it. That's all its purpose. And we consider it a view because it's something they can visually see, right? When they go to the page, there is information sent back to them that they can visually see inside their browser. So we call that a view. When we click submit, the information from the form gets put into a request and transmitted to our insert page, right? The insert.php page. Insert.php's page's only purpose is to process that data and put it into the database. That's all it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to have any view logic in it. However, it does. The success message, the var dumps, the echoing out of the SQL statements, all of that stuff that we've plugged in there that actually halts the page and we see some response back immediately on the page is technically bad practice. It shouldn't be responsible for any of that.
Now, we can excuse var dumps because that's really just us debugging, and that is a normal operation of development, and that's not something you would push to production. Your var dumps you would use, and then you would get rid of them before you ever push your code up, right? The echo SQL statement, same idea. All you're doing is debugging. That's its whole purpose. That's not information you would ever provide back to the user anyways. The success message or the fail message, those need to be handled somewhere else. And biggest reason why we separate that type of logic from the process page is due to something called idempotence. And what idempotence is, it's basically if an action on an object is performed, the object should remain unchanged. Okay? When we insert a new record into our database and we hit that page, what would happen if we refreshed the page? So we're creating a new thing, yeah? Exactly, we create it again. If we click refresh 6,000 times, we will create 6,000 instances of the same thing. What's that? Insert.php, yeah? So the problem there is that is a non-idempotent action, meaning the action we're performing on the insert.php page will result in a change of data because it will cause it to be repeatedly added to the database. That is a bad thing. We don't want that to occur, right? We don't want our users to accidentally resubmit a page over and over again and accidentally create a new record. Update and delete actually are considered idempotent because you can only update a record once. You can't update a record more than once, right? Once it's updated, it's always updated. If you continually hit refresh on that page, all you're doing is updating the same record over and over again with the same data. So there is no change. The action won't result in a change. So it's considered idempotent. Delete is the same idea. You can delete the record only once. There's no possible way for you to delete another record because the record that you're deleting has been selected by its identifier. So again, your change is only affected once. It can't actually change again. You can't do it again and again. So it is also considered idempotent. However, that being said, processing pages should always be treated as though they can potentially be non-idempotent. Meaning that yes, while your update and your delete might not have destructive reactions on your data, other things you're doing in those scripts could. So you should always treat it as though they're non-idempotent. Meaning, once the action has finished, you should get the hell out of there. You need to leave the page. You need to move on to a different location in order to stop or prevent the user from accidentally repeating the action. So this is where we come into a strategy known as redirect. And what redirect basically means is that once the process has finished, we take the user, we perform a new request, and we send the user to a completely different page. When they get to that page, they can hit refresh to their heart's content. They won't accidentally cause the action to happen again. They can't, right? Because they're not on the page anymore. So we're going to do that now. We're going to actually create a separation between our view logic and our processes. And with separating our views, we're not only, because we're redirecting, for example, there's no way for us to give them any information on whether or not they were successful or they failed. So we need to also make sure that that logic carries over as well. So we're going to create a new page called notification. You jump over to your editor and click your little pages thing. Right click on examples and choose notification.php. Watch your spelling here because if you're going to have issues or you think you might have issues with the spelling, call it note.php. Make your life much easier. Somebody in Monday class said I'm just going to call it n.php. Do you? I'm going to put the PHP block in here, but that's just a placeholder. We're not actually going to write anything in here yet, not till we finish adding our changes into another file.
So before we actually make our changes, let's go ahead and open up insert.php. This is the processing script that we use that was responsible for actually creating a new row in the database. If you scroll down, we have our echo statements here, and these have now turned our page into being just a processing page into being a view page, right? Because we're halting and we're showing things that actually have no real meaning or reason to be there. So somehow we need to take these messages and make it so that we can transmit them to notification. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. One way we could do that is we could add them to the URL for notification, right, as query parameters, and then just pick up the query parameter inside notification and display it. The problem with that is formatting. We can wind up with some real issues here. If MySQL error was to return a bunch of odd characters, or we were to wind up with an error message of some sort and it got put into the URL could be improperly formatted and fail. So that's not a good idea. It's not a good way to handle that. We could create a post and force a post request, but that is super tricky and also a lot more of a sledgehammer than we need right now. The other thing we want to be concerned about is if the user was to somehow not go to notification but go to a different page and then go to notification, we want to make sure they get the message that they didn't get originally. So we need to rely on a different superglobal. Get superglobals and post superglobals live for one life cycle and one life cycle only. They get set on page A, they get removed on page B. They're available on page B, but they get removed on page B. When we hit page C, they're gone. You can't access the data that was in them originally. There is one superglobal that we have that lives for the entire life cycle of our application. Do you guys remember what that one's called? We talked about it on lesson 2. Session, exactly. Sessions are kind of interesting because sessions are not, they're language agnostic. They have nothing really to do with the programming language itself. They have to do with how your browser works. So when I go to a page, when Alex goes to a page, we both get session IDs, and that's super important because if he's surfing on Amazon.ca and I'm surfing on Amazon.ca, we don't want to accidentally share a cart, right? I mean, one of us is going to pay for it, so somebody's going to win in the end, but the point is that would be bad. That would be a very bad scenario for Amazon, and there would be a lot of difficulty. So what happens is when users actually access the browser, you each get your own session. Everybody gets their own session, and they're unique to you. Have you ever heard of session hijacking? Session hijacking is where I actually steal your session, and now I am you. And so whatever you're watching on Netflix, I'm currently enjoying myself, right? Because I can steal your session and access all of your cookies, access all of your session details, and things like that. So session hijacking is super bad. But the point is, the general way the internet works, everybody gets their own session. PHP and many languages give us a way to access our session and store data into the session. And the cool thing about that is that data will actually persist as long as the browser is open. Once the browser is closed, the data disappears and it's gone forever. Okay? So we can actually take advantage of that because it means that we can add values that can now persist from page to page. So it doesn't matter how many pages we navigate to, our data remains consistent from page to page. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to create a session variable called notification, and we're going to store our messages into that variable. There's one slight caveat. In order to access session variables, we have to start the session. So we're going to write that as a message. In order to use session, we have to start the session. One very important concept to understand is that you can only start the session once. If you call this command more than once, you will get an error. There are ways around that, though, especially when we start working with included files, because it can happen on occasion, because you'll have started a session in one file and the new file will try again. There are ways to stop that, but we'll talk about that in the future. For now, just try to make sure you only ever call session start one time. So this will start our session. Once we've done that, we have access to the super global session, and we can literally plug whatever we want in it. So we can create new IDs on it, like new indexes, and just fill them with whatever data we want. So we're going to replace echo inside our if statement with $_ let's try that again, $_ session, and get rid of the echo. I'm going to create a key called notification. You can call it note if you want, or whatever you prefer, message. Just make sure you remember what it was. And I'm going to assign it the value of my success message. Oh, there's a new episode of Picard today. Anybody watch it yet? It's pretty good, actually. I mean, he's super old now, though. And then the next one, we're also going to do the same thing. $_ session, notification, and again, equals because it's an assignment, and we'll assign our error message to it. And when we're done, we'll save. Now, all we've done currently is taken session and put some messages inside of it. That's all we've done. We still haven't solved the issue of getting off this page. We're still on the page. So now we've actually made the page worse for the user because they'll hit the page, they'll get no messages whatsoever, have no idea what's going on, and yeah, that's it. They'll just sit there, which will usually, inspire a refresh, because most times when somebody hits a blank page, this is their first response, is to hit refresh. So we need to move this user from the page. And the way we do that in PHP is by sending a new header. So I don't want to get overly convoluted here, but when PHP is parsing, until we actually display something on the page, the response that we're sending to the browser hasn't actually happened yet, which means headers that you normally send as part of your response are in flux. Flux meaning that they're still editable and modifiable. We can actually add a location header. You can do this in JavaScript as well. We can add a location header, which will cause the request that the user currently has on the page to redirect to another page, like an actual 301 redirect. So they will leave the page and go somewhere else, okay? Out of all of that, the only thing I hope you retain is how to do it, which is, geez, I'm just hitting everything. I think I'm having a stroke. Why do I have characters everywhere? Here we go. There. Let's write a comment. Redirect to notification.php. And we have two commands we have to run. The first one is header, which will add a new header to the response header. We put it inside quotations. And formatting is super important. The key for the header has to start with a capital, and it has to be location, not locate, not lock, not anything like that. Has to be the word location. Has to be followed by a colon. There has to be a space. You have no choice. This is just browser headers and how they're defined, which is kind of annoying. And then the location is whatever the address is to the page you want to go to, which you can still use relative URLs. Notification, not all those extra letters, .php. Kind of an annoying thing that will happen with header redirects. Super weird. Anybody worked with multi-threaded code before, coded multi-threaded code? No? All right. So when you run an application like a website and you go to the website, you start with one process. Okay? All your actions that happen on this one process. Think of it like a single processor in your computer. Okay? So all these actions are happening on this one process. When you go to a new page, still happening on the same process. We'll call this a thread, right? Still happening on the same thread. When we do a header redirect, it actually opens up a secondary process, and notification.php will start to process on the second process. This, which is insert.php, will continue even though we've redirected until it's done processing the code on that page. So here's where the problem is. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do parent-child relationships, and we're also going to take a look at validation, sanitization, and normalization. When the user submits data that is incorrect, we're going to return them back to the form to go correct their data. If their data is correct, we're going to process that data and insert it into the database. We're going to separate these two pieces of things that we're doing by a redirect. If the data is incorrect, we're redirecting. If I redirect and say, hey, you screwed up, but I'm still processing and inserting the data into the database anyways, you can see where there's a problem. Meanwhile, they're still filling out this form and getting ready to submit it at the same time. These two actions are handling and processing parallel to each other. This is like the only thing in PHP that does this, that creates these two threads. You can force threads, by the way. If you need super fast PHP stuff, you can definitely create your own threads. But we don't want that to happen, so we need this extra command. And it has an alias as well. And everybody chooses the alias. I don't know why. So exit is the normal command, but the alias is die. So use whichever one you want. Either tell the page to die, go and die, or it can exit. Whatever you choose. They do exactly the same thing. So what that will do is it will cause this thread to stop. And then the other thread becomes the main thread, and everything just continues. Probably more existential than I need to be, but takeaway is make sure you exit after header. So now we're ready to actually see this work. So we're going to go do an insert, see if it actually creates the record, and if everything is golden, pony boy, we should wind up at notification.php. So let's jump over to lesson plan, or not lesson plan, countries. We don't have a link for it, so we'll just go to form.php. Should take us to our new country page. Country names. I was terrible in geography, so I'm running out of them pretty quickly. Australia. Oh my God. Is it ILIA or is it just LIA? ALIA? Okay. Description. Dangerous bugs. Super dangerous bugs. Population? No idea. That many. And create. Yay! You should see a blank page, but if you look at your URL, should say notification.php. So once you click create, you should not be on the insert.php page. If you're on the insert.php page, you've got an error somewhere. You should be at notification.php. But we don't see our error message. We don't see our success message. We see no messages, right? And that has to do with the fact that we didn't actually put any code into notification.php yet. I need code there. So now your logical instinct might be to go, easy enough. Done, right? Echo session notification, right? The same thing I set and insert should work on this page. Boom, drop the mic. Don't get overzealous. I mean, everything I'm saying is just dripping with foreshadow. So if you go back to localhost, refresh the page, and undefined variable session, what are you talking about? I remember the first time I hit this, I went back, I checked my spelling, I like copy and paste the word session from another page. I got really frustrated because I couldn't figure out why I was getting no session. Rule number one with working with session, you must what the session. Start. Always, 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 always have to start the session. So, session, start. Has anybody read Gang of Four? Programming patterns? No? Heard the term singleton? No? All right. This is a singleton, just so you're aware. Basically, what that means is session start will instantiate the session variable, but if it already has existed at some point, it will populate it with the data that already exists. So that's what's happening. This is actually getting reinstantiated, but notification already has a value in it, so it will make sure that it creates it and instantiates it with the value inside of it. So now if you refresh this page, you should see the new country was created successfully or your error message or whatever. But you should see something on the notification page. So yay us, we now have our session variables working. However, if I navigate from notification to say like table.php, right? And then I was to navigate back to notification, message is still there. It's not gone just because I observed it, right? It's not Schrodinger's cat, didn't die in the box. It's still there. It's just that sessions are always persistent. That data always persists. How can I get rid of this? Close my browser. That's pretty much my only solution. No, that's not possible. There's no way, right? There's got to be some way to get rid of the data. Well, there's two different ways we could do it. We could overwrite the data with a null value. That would be one way. Or we could actually get rid of the data entirely, completely remove it from the memory, right? So when we create stuff like this, it goes into memory. We can actually remove it from memory and clear the memory address entirely, freeing up the memory, essentially doing our own garbage collection, so that that data becomes available again. That memory becomes available to our application. That is definitely the better approach. So why don't we do that? What we'll do is we will create, we'll say free the memory. There you go, free the memory. Not likely to be a Nickelodeon movie. Free the memory. How do we free memory? We unset. Unset, and unset will take anything you want, either a variable or an array. Totally your choice. However, if you unset session, you will literally destroy all the session variables that have been set. So not a big deal because we've only set one, but if you've got other information in there, you definitely don't want to do that. We're going to add the square brackets and only unset notification. Under the hood, that's going to go into our memory registry, and it's going to remove that address, completely free it up, make it available again to memory. So if you were to try to access session notification after this point, it'll blow up and you'll get an error message because you've unset it. It's no longer initialized. It's gone. So now if we jump back to our browser, the first time you refresh, the new country was created successfully will still be there because it was still sitting inside the session. Then the next command runs where it unsets it. So now if you refresh, undefined index notification, just like I said would happen, because that variable no longer exists. It's now dead, it's gone. So we need to fix this issue too, just in case the user was to bookmark the notification page, which you might be like, well, that'd be stupid. Why would you bookmark the notification page? I will tell you, they will definitely bookmark the notification page. They always do dumb things like that. So because of that, we don't want this bad user experience where they're going to hit an error message on the page. We want to make sure that the user has a good experience. So they don't freak out and call us or access our support line or something like that. There's two ways we can handle this. Either we can say, hey, you accessed this page by accident, or the better way is to just redirect them. We already know how to redirect.
If there's no notification, let's send them back to the table. They can go see all the data, all the pretty fun, safe things on the table, right? So let's do that. We're going to Alt-Tab back to notification. And we need to do this action below our session start. Redirect the derpy user. We only want to redirect if the user accesses the page directly and there is no notification to show them. That's a very important use case that we're trying to solve here. So we're going to say if we're going to say if empty, which is a PHP function that checks a variable to see if it's null, undefined, doesn't exist, or is just a blank string. So you get 4 different nice checks on that one function. If empty, $_session, notification. Okay, so if that is empty, then redirect. So we'll do a header, location with a capital L, colon, and we'll send them to table.php. And then what is super, 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 super important that we do after we do the header? Right? We got to die. Exit. Or die, your choice. Maybe write a little note, otherwise the page continues to process. I've always considered writing threaded code by using header. So if you don't exit, this page is going to navigate to table.php, but on another thread, echo session notification is still going to occur, and unset session notification is still going to occur, but on a separate thread. But you're looking at table.php and have no idea that's still happening. Not a big deal in this scenario. Very big deal, though, when you're like, yeah, the data you just gave me is wrong. So go back to the form and fix it, yet you forgot to exit. So you're still shoving it in the database and then redirecting from there. It's just not a good idea. You can also wind up with memory leaks in that scenario because generally when you build that page, you're going to have a check that says whether or not the data they gave you was correct. If it's incorrect, you're going to redirect them back to the form, but you didn't exit. So now they're at the form. The page is still processing, right? It's going down and inserting stuff in the database, and then it hits another error check where it says, hey, if you are missing this thing, redirect. So it redirects, only this is still happening in the background. So now you've got 2 processes open, and the third process is still continuing. Hits another redirect, same thing is occurring, and you now have a memory leak. Yeah. So you want to avoid that. If you exit, you terminate the file. It's done. That process is done. The memory releases, all of it releases, and you're now back to your regular programming. The nice safe space. So we got to make sure we exit, but you could intentionally use that to your advantage. If you wanted to multi-thread, you could use headers to like literally create multi-threaded applications. That's not the good way to do it. That would be a terrible way to do it, but you could. I just thought it was an interesting idea. Everybody else is finding it boring. We're going to move on. So now that we've done this, we're redirecting. If they're on the page and they're not supposed to be there, we're going to redirect them back to table.php. The rest of the logic is perfect. Let's Alt-Tab to here. If you hit redirect, boom, right back at the table.php. Change table to notification. Notification. I mean, I'm going to go to notification, damn it. That's where I want to be. Hit enter. Nope, sorry. You have no messages to display on this page. So back to table with you. If I go back to the form, create a new country, there we go, and click create, notification works because I have a notification now. So now I'm meeting the if conditions clause, right? But if I refresh, back to table.php with you. So now an interesting thing to note, we're adding this to our insert.php, but we haven't added it to delete or update, so it would need to be added there as well. Another interesting thing, and I showed this to a student on Monday because they were asking about it, they kept navigating to edit.php directly, and they were having a lot of difficulty understanding why this was erroring out. They had a lot of difficulty with the query string. And I said, well, one way we can solve this is by making it that if the query string is missing, we redirect you back to the table so that you remember to click the edit links instead of navigating to edit.php directly. So I'll show you how to do the same thing because it is kind of handy. And it is something you would do as a developer to give a better user experience, right? So go to edit.php and scroll to the very top of your page. And the good news is we don't have to do a session check because it's not the session variable we care about in this scenario. Right above our connection, and it's super important you understand the concept that we want to do this as soon as possible because there's no reason for us to waste resources connecting to the database if they're not supposed to be there. We just want to leave, right? That's it. Before we do anything else, we want to leave. So we'll write if no query string, then go away. And we'll say if, and I'm just curious, put on your logic hats here. What would you check to tell whether or not you should be on that page? Yeah, the get variable. $_ ID. And we want to check if it's a what? Empty, exactly. You guys are super smart. There we go. So if it's empty, header, location, and I think going back to table.php is a good idea. And exit. And again, you want to exit. Otherwise, you're going to process the connection. You're going to get the results set. You're going to go through all this extra stuff that you don't need to do. So you want to make sure you exit. Now here's the fun thing. Copy those 5 lines, Control C. Not only was this particular student accessing edit.php directly, they were also accessing delete.php directly and having the same issue because the query string was missing. So because of that, again, we just take this exact same logic, identical, because delete also uses the same query string, and we just paste it at the top of the file. And now we've just fixed the way delete.php works. So if the user or even yourselves access delete.php directly, it will redirect you to table.php, and hopefully that will help trigger a memory that you need to click the links, not go to the pages directly. We can do the same thing to update, but we need to modify it, right? If you go to update.php, go to the top of the page, paste. We have to make one change. What do we need to change? Yes, exactly. We can't use get. We need to use the post because that's where our ID is located. Otherwise, the logic is exactly the same. I always say term, but people get confused. So you guys understand that your semesters are broken into 2 terms, right? And you're separated by reading week, right? So next term, right, so the last 6 weeks, I'm going to show you how to build something called a flash notification. And the way flash notification works is it actually attaches messages to this. So not only would we redirect them with a message saying, you accessed an incorrect page. Here's a nice safe page for you to be on. Because it's a good idea to not just abruptly move your user, right? People get freaked out by stuff like that. They went to notification.php. They expect to be on notification.php. If you're going to move them, you should tell them why, right? So we've got 3 pages now. We've got edit.php with our get. We've got delete.php with the get check. And now we've got update.php with the post check. If we alt-tab back to edit, to this edit page, which we access directly, and I hit refresh, navigates us right back to our page. But I should be able to click edit on any of the links because the query is there. If the query is missing, so if I was to take that query out, so backspace, 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 and hit enter, it'll redirect back to table, which should prompt the user to click the link and not try to access edit.php directly. The same applies with delete.php. If I change this to delete, right back to the table, and if I try update, right back to the table. That's a good user experience. You're stopping your user from making, mistakes. Any questions about any of that? Yeah. Can you make the delete before the redirect? Are you saying delete? What are you saying? Delete? Oh, a delay. So you want to show them the message, delay, and then redirect. Yeah, so that leads into another issue with sessions. The second we output any information to the screen, we have committed a response. Headers have to be done and sent before responses. Have to be. So no, you can't echo anything out before that point. You can create a delay. There's a way for you to stop time basically and stop it from going anywhere, but you wouldn't be able to display anything. That's the problem because it would create an error. There's a way around that though. You can use something called session buffers to do that, but it gets a lot more tricky to do that. And basically what you're doing is you're flushing your stream buffer with the session so that you can display a message or something on the screen. But that gets a little bit trickier. If you want to know more about it, look up OB flush. Yeah, OB flush. Any other questions? Yep. Above that is likely missing a semicolon or not ended properly. Maybe you're missing a quote character, a parenthesis, curly brace, something like that. What page? On your delete.php? Here, I'll load up delete so that you can see my delete. What line is it on? Oh, this line right here? And you've got a semicolon right here? Curly brace. This ID has the quotations around it. There should be single quotes around that. And then double quotes around the whole SQL statement. You need the semicolon, yeah. Because what's happening actually is yeah. Otherwise it will literally parse into the next statement. Yeah. No worries. All right, let's talk about the lab. So the lab, nice and easy. You guys actually had time left to actually talk about the lab. There is a download link for it, so make sure you click the download link. And don't forget to do the tests. Password is CRUD, all capital letters. I'm going to extract the link. By the way, the next lab, super easy. You're literally just going to give me your GitHub link and your Heroku link. And that'll be it. We'll be doing it in class, so life will be super simple. I'm going to open this code. Cool. All right, open editors. Actually, that didn't work the way I wanted it to work.
Let me try that again. Open with code. Come here. All right. So there's 4 files to edit this time. However, there's less work. 4 files, but less work. There's table.php, edit.php, update.php, and delete.php. So literally the 4 files we created today. Notification has been deliberately left out, but I do recommend that you practice with sessions. They will wind up on quizzes. It will definitely wind up on your midterm. Okay, so make sure you understand how sessions work. All right, so the first page you're going to edit is table, and you're just going to do step 1 using the correct MySQL I function, fetch all the rows as an associative arrays. I think that's already done. Yeah, that's already done. Just ignore step 1. Step 2, using a for each loop, iterate over the rows. That's also done. What the hell's going on here? Oh, these two. Here they are. Step 1 and 2, add the appropriate query parameter to the link below. So if you look at this link, it's not complete. The link is missing something, the query parameter. So make sure you add the query parameter. I mean, do you remember how to multi-cursor? Hold down Alt and write the query parameter. It's the same for both, right? That's 1. Edit.php. I've done most of it for you. You need to fix this. So that you only return the single MySQL row. And then you need to make sure you add the value to the 2 input fields. Okay? The update.php, write the SQL to update the row, which should be easy. It's a combination of some PHP that we've done, plus what you guys have learned in your relational database class. Everything else is done for you. You'll know this worked as long as this error handler kind of works with it. And then delete.php, same kind of thing. You're just writing the SQL. That's really it. Write the SQL to delete the row. That's all you're doing. Cool? Nice and easy? Probably take not even 5 minutes, but yeah. Awesome. You have time now if you want to work on it or ask me any questions about the project or anything like that. I will post our lesson to YouTube. Last week I posted Monday's lesson to YouTube. Hopefully you noticed that. It showed up under the course videos. So if you click on course videos, you should see a lesson 3 YouTube there. It is Monday's class though. I will post our class mostly because we covered more stuff than what I was able to cover on Monday. So I'll post this class for sure. All right. Have a good night.